Ladies and gentlemen, I thought we could get together once again to talk about the Oscars.
And the Oscar goes to I'm Still Here, Brazil.
Mikey Madison.
Zoe Saldana.
Adrian Brody.
And the Oscar goes to?
Honora.
No. Hold up. No, not those Oscars. I'm talking about the 98th Annual Academy Awards, which will be happening in about 11 to 12 months. What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the garage. Gerald here with you, of course. And yes, I'm going to be talking about the upcoming Academy Awards, the 98th Oscars, which presumably will be taking place next March in the year of 2026. I do a on-the-radar experiment every year, really for myself, but since my YouTube channel has gone through a rebrand and I've been doing a lot of award seasons coverage, I thought it only made sense to put it on my YouTube channel this year. So I've been doing research for a little over a week since we ended the 97th Academy Awards, trying to figure out what should be on the radar for potential Best Picture nominees next year. Not only Best Picture nominees, but possible acting categories such as leads and supporting, and even some technical achievements that we might be looking at for screenplays, cinematography, editing, etc. So what I did for this experiment on this video that you're watching is I gathered up my top 40. These are 40 movies that are slated to come out this year before the end of 2025 that would make them eligible for next year's Oscars, that I think, at least in some form or another, have a shot to show up on Academy Awards night in the nomination column. Now, what I did and what I told myself for these 40 films is that all 40 of these, in one way or another, whether it's a really small percentage chance or whether it might be a no-brainer for a couple of these, they have a chance to be in that Best Picture 10, the discussion for the top 10 movies of the year that the Academy comes up with. And then as an extension from that, I will let you know as we're going through this presentation if some of these movies might have performances that maybe are even stronger than the actual Best Picture possibility. I have decided to list them in alphabetical order, so I will go through them A to Z, and I'll just talk for a few seconds about each one, potentially what they're about, and why I think they should at least be in your mind as you're starting to think about next year's nominees. The only thing you really need to know in terms of how I graded these films and how they ended up making my top 40 is there's a very simple legend going to be at the bottom of the screen, which is essentially green, yellow, and red. If it's in green and it has a percentage chance over 80% to make it into the Best Picture nominations discussion. If it's in yellow, it's going to be in that 60% to 79 or 80% range, where it's like right there and it could very easily be a nominee, but it could also vanish into the netherworld of Oscar potential. Like one of the movies I had in there last year, for example, would be Challengers, and we all know what the Academy did with that thing this year. And then if you're in red, I am saying that you have below a 60% chance to make it in as a Best Picture nominee, even though there might be some director or performance nominations in the mix for those movies, and I'll mention that when that comes up. This could obviously change, but as I'm sitting here right now, based on what I've heard and read about these films, if they're in red and they're below a 60% chance, I'm frankly saying right now I think they have a very, very, very little shot at making it to the 10 for Best Picture. Now, of course, there are going to be some that I missed, that maybe I don't even know about, frankly. I've been doing research, like I said, for about a week to 10 days. But I'm sure there's some that I haven't even heard about yet that will burst onto the scene. I also struggled a little bit with my international picks and the eligibility if a film was premiered like it can last year, for example, but it's getting a release in the US this year, then technically that makes it eligible for Best Picture at the Oscars, even though it wouldn't be eligible for something like international feature because it has to be in the calendar year that it was released in the home country. Now look, this is just for fun. This list is absolutely 1000% going to change. This is not going to be locked in the 10 that we get for Best Picture. Last year I had a movie like Challengers I mentioned to you. I had a movie like Joker, Folie à Deux. I had several films in the mix, Maria from Pablo Larraín, that I thought were going to be Oscar players at this year's ceremony, and they came nowhere near the Oscars. I guess Challengers kind of came near it because of the Globe success, but generally speaking, I missed on several that sounded really juicy. I will say, although from a proof perspective on my YouTube channel, it really doesn't show up until my first early predictions video, which would have been in August of 2024 here on the channel. But I did get 5 of what I thought my initial top 10 Best Picture nominees were going to be when I did this project last year, which I know that's only 50%, but that's pretty good Because as I'm sitting here, I have a list of movies. I know who directed it. I know who's in them. But it's not like I really know what these movies are going to shape up to be, with the exception of a couple sequels that are in the mix that you kind of have an idea what to expect. But otherwise, you just read the log line, you see who's directing it, you know what the narrative and the story kind of is, if it falls in drama, if it's a genre film, if it's comedy, and you kind of go on your gut feeling, at least I do, based on what the Academy typically does. All right, first up, we were talking about challengers. I've already mentioned it a couple times on this video. Luca Guadagnino's new film, After the Hunt, is the first movie I'm going to mention on this video. This is a stacked cast, and I know Luca's last two films did not hit, which we already talked about challengers, and of course Queer. Even Daniel Craig wasn't able to secure that Best Actor nomination, which a lot of people thought he may get, and of course Sebastian Stan kind of slid in there at the last minute. So Luca's on a bit of a drought right now with Academy Award nominations, which is actually one of the reasons why I think this one should be in the hunt. Anemone, which honestly I don't even know if that's how you pronounce that, is a new film directed by Ronan Day-Lewis. If that name sounds familiar, it's because it's the son of famed, acclaimed actor, well-decorated actor, Daniel Day-Lewis. A lot of people have referred to DDL as the greatest living actor, who actually said he was going to be retiring from acting after Phantom Thread a few years ago. Well, guess what? He's back. He's coming out of retirement to star in his son's feature-length debut film. So we'll see. I mean, this could be something like akin to something similar to the Meyerowitz stories, where it's a very strong familial story with some powerhouse performances. They don't always get Academy Award recognition, but I think when Daniel Day-Lewis's name is being uttered during award season, you have to consider it. Next up would be the first movie that I'm actually putting in the 10 for Best Picture on this video. It's one of my early predictions to be in your nominations for Best Picture, and it's Mona Fastvold's film, Anne Lee. I don't have a ton of information aside from just that general plot line, but I will say that Mona Fastvold and Brady Corbet wrote this screenplay together, just like they did with The Brutalist, and Corbet directed The Brutalist, and we saw that it got 10 nominations this year. Well, now it's just a role reversal situation where it also seems to be a very grandiose, kind of larger-than-life story that they both co-wrote, and now they're switching seats in the director's chair, and Mona Fastvold's going to get a chance here, which would also be huge in terms of a female director representation, and I think she stands one of the best shots this year, maybe not the best, as you'll find out in a moment, to get that kind of female nod for Best Picture, and possibly for Best Director, too. Back-to-back Best Picture nominees here for me, another one in the green, as you see, and I didn't rank anything higher than a 90% probability just because I don't know. I'm not going to give something a 95 or 100 because I just don't know. This movie could bomb, it could fall flat, it could get horrible reviews. But I think the Academy always throws in 2, maybe 3 like box office general public successes into their Best Picture nominees. I have this as almost a no-brainer to be nominated. As you see, the highest score that I gave any of these films. I think it will be one of the 10 nominated. I don't think it really stands a chance to win necessarily unless it is a Lord of the Rings situation and it's 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. Everybody loves it. It's like, the talk of the town for months. Then maybe I'll change my kind of mentality there. But I think that Lord of the Rings analogy that people like to use, that's the only example. So you can't really use that across, the Oscars history because it doesn't mean it's ever going to happen again, frankly. In the yellow, right outside the Best Picture nominees with a 76% likelihood based on my mentality, is a movie called The Ballad of a Small Player. It's starring Colin Farrell and Tilda Swinton, first of all, who both are no strangers to the Academy Awards. And it's also directed by Mr. Edward Berger. Edward Berger's on a bit of a run with not only the BAFTAs, which makes sense, but also the Academy, even though for some reason they continue to overlook him for Best Director. So this might be the year, third time's a charm, where they say, okay, let's give the guy a director nom. And I definitely think it stands a chance for Best Picture because like we've seen with Conclave and with All Quiet on the Western Front, they really love his films and they definitely give it its due credit when it comes to nominations. This one's a little further out of the realm of possibility, but it's still in the yellow. It has a shot on the fence there. It's a movie called Blue Moon, directed by Richard Linklater. It's based on a true story, which there's going to be a few of those in there this year, whether we like it or not. It's not a music biopic per se, but it is the true story of Lorenz Hart and Richard Rodgers' journey to write and eventually create the wildly successful musical Oklahoma. It stars Ethan Hawke, Bobby Cannavale, and Margaret Qualley is in the lead actress role in this film. She's actually got a couple movies coming out this year that could kind of finally get her into the Oscar-nominated mix, whether it's for supporting or lead. We'll be talking about a few of them as we go through the video. This is the first one, and it's called Blue Moon. I think it should be on your radar. There's 2 movies coming out that are centered on the Frankenstein story this year. We're going to be talking about another one a little bit later, and I think that one, coming up later in the alphabetical order list here, is the one that would have the more likelihood to be in your Best Picture discussion. But I don't want to rule out Maggie Gyllenhaal's film, The Bride, which is also a Frankenstein story, just more kind of centered on the bride of Frankenstein. At least that's my understanding. I mean, the cast list alone is enough to make you kind of perk up a little bit. Jessie Buckley in the titular Bride of Frankenstein role. Christian Bale, who they've released some photos of a tattooed Frankenstein that he's going to be playing. And you got to know this guy's going to be going all in. He probably actually had the bolts installed in his neck for 3 months while they were filming it. Annette Bening, Penelope Cruz, Jake Gyllenhaal, Peter Sarsgaard, of course, in a Maggie Gyllenhaal film. I mean, this is going to be stacked. And I haven't seen anything aside from the cast stills that we got of Christian Bale and Jessie Buckley. So I don't have a ton to go on when it comes to the tone or the vibe or if this movie is Academy friendly, as they say. Another one that's kind of floating around right there in that yellow zone that has a really strong possibility, but it's going to be based on the tone and what kind of Yorgos Lanthimos film we're getting here. Are we getting something like The Lobster or The Favorite, or are we getting something like Kinds of Kindness? They obviously even like Poor Things, which is kind of somewhere in the middle of those Kinds of Kindness favorite kind of pendulum. Clemens and Emma Stone, of course, are probably going to be in that lead actor and actress discussion this year. I just don't know what kind of Lanthimos this is, and that always makes me weary. If it's too far-fetched and it's too crazy, which seems weird to say with the success of a movie like Poor Things, but I think the Academy will gravitate towards a more old-school kind of Lanthimos approach, if that kind of makes sense, although they did love Poor Things, so I don't really know. I just am weary about Begonia because I feel like it might be too fantastical for them to throw it into Best Picture, even though I think it does stand a good chance with some of these performances. Next up is another one that I currently have in my initial 10 for Best Picture. It is the new Darren Aronofsky film called Caught Stealing. Hank Thompson, a burned out former baseball player, is unwittingly plunged into a wild fight for survival in the downtown criminal underworld of 90s New York City. The lead character, Hank, that I just mentioned, is played by Austin Butler, who has had some recent success with the Academy and is definitely an up-and-coming rising star who's already been in a couple Best Picture nominated films. And you have Aronofsky. The Academy responds really well to his films. They don't always get into Best Picture. Black Swan is the most obvious example of a Best Picture nominated film for him, but they always show up in some way or another, whether it's for The Whale or Mickey Rourke for The Wrestler. Aronofsky's name when he makes a movie is always kind of in the conversation in the Academy offices, I think. Now you guys know we're going to get our music biopics this year. Be ready. We'll see what Scott Cooper does with Deliver Me From Nowhere, which is the music biopic about Bruce Springsteen. Jeremy Allen White is playing Springsteen, of course, right now hugely popular for his starring role in The Bear. And basically it's about a time period when Springsteen was recording the album Nebraska, somewhat of a comeback for him. And this is what it's going to tell the story of. So to me, it has elements of A Complete Unknown in there as well, because that was a very focused on a specific time in that artist's story. And that might be something similar we get here from Cooper and the team behind Deliver Me From Nowhere. I'm just not super sold right now on it being a Best Picture nominee, but obviously I have it in the mix. And I think you could be looking at performances from Alan White, who is well respected just based on his TV work right now. And of course, Jeremy Strong also. So keep your eye on it. So Lynn Ramsey is one of my favorite filmmakers working today. I love all of her movies, but I also am going to admit to you that all of them kind of deal with the psychosis of these kind of broken characters. And they can be, for lack of a better way to put it, kind of strange for the most part. I love them, but they don't scream Academy friendly to me. She's got another movie coming out this year called Die My Love, starring Jennifer Lawrence, who obviously the Academy loves, and Robert Pattinson, who has been building a strong resume as of late. And that's with me sitting here as Mickey 17 was just released this week. I just am waiting to see like what the level of brutality for this movie is and how much it leans towards the psychological or even horror aspects, because that would take it a little further away from the Academy's giving it the green card to get into Best Picture. I've got it in the yellow right now, but it is one of my most anticipated of the year, and I'm kind of hanging out to see what it turns out to be, because I would love nothing more than for Lynn Ramsey to be one of those female nominees for director like we discussed earlier. One of the things that's been missing as of late at the Academy Awards, which used to be year after year after year, especially getting into like the 1990s, but then after that it kind of started dissipating a little bit more and more, and that's the old American Western. It's been a while since a really, really good Western was in the spotlight at the Academy Awards. What if it's Ari Aster's new film, Eddington? It stars Joaquin Phoenix, which of course was in Aster's Beau is Afraid last year. There's Emma Stone again in this movie. There's Austin Butler again in this film. Pedro Pascal also has a supporting role. It's a great cast, and Ari Aster is one of the craftsmen of filmmaking right now. The only problem is he doesn't have a lot of Oscar lineage because he does horror films and genre films. So he's shifting to do a Western here. So my question is this like a horror Western? Is this like a genre Western, or is this just like an old school American Western? It's going to be really interesting to see what he does with it, or if he still kind of sticks to his weird, strange uniqueness that he's brought to all of his other films, that while I love them, they do not scream Academy friendly to me either. So we'll see how Eddington turns out. Right now I have it on the radar, but it's at 60%, and it's like almost in the red because I don't frankly trust the Academy to do something like that, but we'll see how it turns out. Speaking of being in the red, I do have this movie in the red at 56% likelihood, although I see myself increasing that percentage as we get further and further along in award season, and as I get to see more stuff from this film. It's directed by Scarlett Johansson, who has not done a feature-length film from the director's chair. She's done some short films, but this is her first feature-length film as a director. I don't know if she's in it. I don't think she has a role in the film. She may, and if she does, it hasn't been credited yet. But the star of the film is June Squibb, of course, from Thelma this past year, who I think we did a disservice by not getting her a little more notoriety for that performance. It just says it follows a 90-year-old woman trying to rebuild her life after the death of her best friend. As a result, she moves back to New York City after living in Florida for decades. June Squibb is chef's kiss. I think if this is a juicy, dramatic role that really shows like different levels of emotion from her, because in Thelma we saw mostly comedy, but there was hints of that there as well. And then of course in her career she's been doing that for a long, long time. So if she can bring out those Oscar clips in this movie, and then you have a well-established, well-respected actress who's taking a shot at director here in Scarlett Johansson, Eleanor the Great could start to be a topic of conversation as we get further into award season. Some of these that get put into this top 40 are really based on the people involved in the project that I may not have even knew about until the last week when I was researching. And one of those is James L. Brooks' new movie called Ella McKay. It stars Jamie Lee Curtis, Woody Harrelson, Iowa Debris again. It says an idealistic young politician juggles familial issues and a challenging work life while preparing to take over the job of her mentor, which is the incumbent governor and also her longtime friend. But frankly, it's James L. Brooks and kind of his return to feature films here. When he had success at the Academy Awards with As Good as It Gets, obviously starring Jack Nicholson, Spanglish starring Adam Sandler. They got mentions at the Academy Awards. They were in the conversation, and then he kind of went away from filmmaking for quite a while. And this is kind of his return, and not only that, it could be his return to glory. People are going to see the name James L. Brooks, and they're definitely going to be watching the film, and they're going to be thinking about the potential Academy Award nominations that may come his way once again. And then here is where my Frankenstein movie that makes the top 10 for Best Picture, and that's Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. Now, what gives me pause with this one is the Netflix tag and the horror tag. Those two things combined might be too much to get it into Best Picture, but right now I'm choosing to put it there because of the Guillermo del Toro of it all. If The Shape of Water got into Best Picture, if movies like Pan's Labyrinth got Academy Award recognition, then why couldn't Frankenstein, this classic story that everybody knows? And not only that, you have amazing actors and performers like Mia Goth and Oscar Isaac. Academy Award winner Christoph Waltz is in this film. Jacob Elordi, who was in Saltburn a couple years ago and who is a up-and-comer in his own right, is going to be playing the monster Frankenstein in the film. So I am beyond excited. This was in my top 5 most anticipated of the year. Guillermo del Toro's kind of dark, gothic, almost like pop art style of filming these really classic horror stories, even if it's just in the narrative, but in this case, it's an actual classic horror story in Frankenstein. If it's not too horror, if it's more artistic horror, like a film like Nosferatu from last year, then maybe we're back in the top 10 for Best Picture as a horror genre. If we're going to be, though, I think the best chance this year is probably Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. Anytime del Toro does a movie, he is so well respected by the Academy and basically several branches across the Academy that he always stands a good chance to get on the long list, the short list, and then enough votes to get into the nominations. And I think that's where we hopefully are headed with Frankenstein. Up next is Hamnet from director Chloe Zhao. This is another one that I think is in the 10 for Best Picture this year. I've got it there currently with an 85% probability. It's the retelling of the Shakespeares losing their only son, Hamnet. Jessie Buckley plays Agnes Shakespeare, and Paul Mescal is going to play William Shakespeare. Emily Watson and Joe Alwyn also star in the movie. It's just got Oscar written all over it. I think it's in the 10 for Best Picture. I think Chloe Zhao returns to the Oscars triumphantly after her success with Nomadland. 3 in a row here that I think are in the 10 for Best Picture, which is just alphabetical order is how it fell here. Highest to Lowest, which is Spike Lee's interpretation and kind of remake of the Kurosawa crime thriller from the 1960s called High and Low. Stars Denzel Washington and Jeffrey Wright, who of course was in the Academy discussion last year for American Fiction, and Denzel is Denzel. So I expect this to be a player. Usually when Spike Lee has a film in the mix, especially when it's like a period piece, I assume this is also going to take place in the 1960s, then it's usually in the discussion, and frankly, it usually gets some nominations, if not all the top of the line ones. So I think Spike Lee is going to be back in the front row at the Academy Awards next year. How about a movie called The History of Sound? This is another one that I heard the premise and I thought to myself, Oscar nominee. 2 young men during World War I set out to record the lives, voices, and music of their American countrymen. Paul Mescal and Josh O'Connor are those 2 men. So Paul Mescal's got a ton of stuff coming up, by the way. Josh O'Connor really impressed me in Challengers. And being that it's a wartime drama period setting, it just screams Oscar bait to me. We will see. I'm also really excited to see this one based on the performers involved. So we had a lot of like high yellow, and then we had some greens in there with Best Picture nominees. Now we have a couple here that I think are far fetches and like ones I wanted to mention on the off chance that they surprise. And also I think they might have the ability to get nominated for some performances or even texts for these particular films if Best Picture is out of the discussion. First up would be a movie called The Housemaid, directed by Paul Feig, and it stars Sydney Sweeney and Amanda Seyfried, who is also going to be in several other projects that I've even mentioned on this video alone, but she's got a big year ahead of her as well. I do think The Housemaid might be too much like thriller-esque, like kind of 50 Shades almost type thriller, maybe not to the level of quality as those films, but that's kind of the vibes I get from what I've been reading about it. However, I just think that Paul Feig, Sydney Sweeney being involved, there's a possibility that you could be looking at some things like screenplay or even Sydney Sweeney or Amanda Seyfried, who we mentioned earlier, and other projects also. So I think The Housemaid might be thrown around there. And then once it comes out and we see what the tone of the film is and what the reception of the film is, that could change the opinion one way or the other. It's in the red for me right now. I think it doesn't really stand a very good chance as we're sitting here. Another one that doesn't really stand a great chance to me right now, but could increase over the course of the season, is a movie called Huntington. It stars Glenn Powell, Ed Harris, and Margaret Qualley again. And this is another lead role, I think, for her. She's the lead female role in the movie. The reason I wanted to put this one in here is because I'm looking for a vehicle for Glenn Powell. I think his Oscar nomination, not necessarily win, but I think his Oscar nomination is coming. I think he's in the next few years, he's going to be nominated for something, whether that's a lead actor or a supporting actor, depending on what the role is. I thought it could happen with Hitman last year, and of course he got the Golden Globe nomination, and a lot of people had his name in the mix for a while there. So will it be with Huntington? I'm not sure, because the premise of the movie, as you see on the screen there, looks like it might be a little bit of a revenge thriller, heist kind of vibe. So I'm not really sure what to expect. I haven't seen any images or trailers or anything. I just know that Glenn Powell's in this. He's not going to get nominated for a movie like The Running Man, so maybe it'll be Huntington. It's on my radar, but as you can see, it's in the red. We are into the second half of my list here, and the next one up is a movie that some of my friends have actually seen because it premiered at Sundance, and it's called If I Had Legs, I Would Kick You. I think one of my guaranteed nomination locks that I would give you right now if I were doing a acting list would be for Rose Byrne for this film. I've heard that her kind of out of character performance that we get from her in this movie is otherworldly, and it's just people are just reveling at her performance. So I expect her to be in the lead actress discussion when it comes around. This movie also notably stars Conan O'Brien in his first major film role, where he's acting as, I believe, her psychiatrist in the movie. So that's going to be interesting to see Conan do a dramatic performance like that. So I'm looking forward to that also. So Noah Baumbach is coming back. He's the screenwriter and the director for a film called J. Kelly. The film stars George Clooney, Adam Sandler, Laura Dern, Greta Gerwig, Billy Crudup, Stacy Keach, Riley Keough. I mean, we are stacked top to bottom with this cast. It says it's described as a funny and emotional coming-of-age story about adults. That worries me a little bit, although there was rumor that Adam Sandler made his appearance in his blue sweatsuit hoodie thing at the Oscars with Conan this past weekend because he wants to kind of get his name in that mix with the Oscars crowd because of J. Kelly. Now, Adam Sandler's done a couple movies in the last 5 to 10 years that have gotten him mentions on the awards circuit, like Hustler or Uncut Gems, but none of them came to fruition, even though he got nominations from other bodies in those respective years. So could this be the Adam Sandler Oscar nomination performance that we've been waiting for? Maybe. Another one that premiered at Sundance is Kiss of the Spider-Woman, starring Jennifer Lopez. Hustlers and Jennifer Lopez's snub for lead actress for that movie a few years ago is still one of the big kind of sad surprises for me of the last 5 or 6 years at the Academy Awards. So I'm mentioning this one. I think it has an off chance for Best Picture, but really it's more for J-Lo. I think Jennifer Lopez could do something special with this movie that gets her back into that actress discussion. And I would have your eye on her. And whenever a really powerful performance carries a movie to lift it up, in terms of notoriety, it always stands a chance to boost it up for Best Picture also. This was another one that premiered at Sundance, and it had fairly great reviews across the board. So I look forward to seeing how this one is received a little wider as we get down the road. One of my most anticipated movies of the year is a film that showed up at the TIFF Film Festival last year and didn't have distribution in time to be eligible for this year's Oscars, but that's going to change because it got distribution for this year from Neon, and that's The Life of Chuck. It stars Tom Hiddleston and Mark Hamill. A lot of people are saying keep Mark Hamill on your radar for a supporting actor nomination, which would be huge to have him as a player in the Oscars. But this is directed by Mike Flanagan, who is a horror filmmaker that tells scary stories for the most part, whether that's TV or film. And in this case, it is a drama about a man's life and coming to terms with being in the second half of his life, played by Tom Hiddleston. I've also heard great things about his performance and kind of the mundane nature of his everyday life and his job and things like that. So I'm excited to see how it plays out. I'm really excited to see Flanagan tackle something that's non-horror, and we'll see if it garners enough respect on the circuit to maybe get it a Best Picture nomination. I've got it outside of the realm of possibility right now, but I think if people liked it as much as they seem to have liked it at TIFF, and it does well once it's released, we'll see what happens. A lot of people might be surprised that I'm giving a 67% likelihood to a movie called Marty Supreme. And that's because if you know me, you know I love Timothée Chalamet, and he is the star in this movie playing an ex-ping pong player in a film directed by one of the Safdie brothers, Josh Safdie. There's another Safdie movie that I'm going to be mentioning in a little bit from the other Safdie brother, but this one's directed by Josh. They're not working together on these two films this year. I do think Timothée Chalamet is on his way to his second back-to-back nomination for Best Actor for this movie, and that's just based on stills I've seen, because that's how much I trust in the guy's dedication to the craft. However, the movie, and being that it's a Safdie project, and being that it's really the first solo direction for both these dudes, and they're not working together, I just don't know that this is the movie that's going to give them their first, Best Picture, Best Director, the big top-of-the-line awards you would get typically if you're in the Best Picture nominations. And like most of the movies on this list, we'll have to wait and see when it comes out, or at least when I see it and when I see the reception and how it's being garnered by the industry. But right now, it's in the yellow, Marty Supreme, although Timmy is coming for another Oscar, and I can only hope we get the campaign that we got this past year. Kelly Reichardt is another female director that I'm just waiting for her to get her flowers. It could be this year with a movie called The Mastermind. Another Josh O'Connor vehicle here, as he is in the lead actor role for this movie. And it is a wartime period piece, which immediately makes me go, okay, hang on a second. So it has the Vietnam War as a backdrop, but it essentially tells the story of a man who is an art thief, and he performs various art heists. But like I said, it's happening while the Vietnam War is going on, and I think that is going to be a big part of the narrative of the film, or at least of the aesthetics of the film, which could lead to it being a little more Oscar friendly. I'm really, really hopeful for this one, if for no other reason than for Kelly Reichardt's direction chances. But right now I've got it in the yellow. We'll just kind of have to wait and see. Also in the yellow for me is a A24 movie called Materialists. This is going to star Dakota Johnson and Chris Evans. So right away I go, all right, well, that doesn't really scream Oscar to me. I absolutely love both of those people, especially Dakota Johnson. But I'm just not seeing a lot of Oscar love come the way of the performers in this film. However, the director of the film is Celine Song, and it's, like I said, it's been picked up by A24, which of course those two came together for the Past Lives success that that film had at the Academy Awards and other bodies as well. It says a young, ambitious New York City matchmaker finds herself torn between the perfect match and her imperfect ex. So it sounds a bit like a romantic comedy to me. I'm not saying that can't get Oscar nominations, but it doesn't make me super, super confident about it at the same time. I do love Celine Song, and I trust in her, and A24 tends to do a great job picking them. It just depends on what they decide to push as we get to award season, and I don't know that this will be their push. I mean, hell, if they couldn't push Sing Sing, why are they going to push Materialists? I've got this one right outside the 10 for Best Picture, probably like around number 12 or 13 right now, and it's Michael, the biopic from Antoine Fuqua about, of course, Michael Jackson. The reason it fell out of what it pretty easily would have been in my top 10, especially as like that music biopic representation that we almost always get, are the rewrites that I've been reading about as of late. They had to do reshoots and rewrites for basically the last hour of the film because the family did not sign off on some stuff that got depicted, I guess, in the final product. There's like a 4-hour cut. They're bringing it down. They're taking the last hour, reshooting it. That never bodes well for the kind of consistency and authenticity of the story throughout. So if we're going to get this really kind of hard-nosed reporting on his life for 2/3, and then all of a sudden we're going to get this cookie-cutter bow tied on top, I don't know that it's going to work, at least with the Academy. I think it'll probably still be a massive hit, and you're probably looking at performance nominations for Coleman Domingo. This time in supporting actors, he's going to be playing Michael Jackson's abusive father, James. So depending on how that is received, I would expect his name to be thrown around. But I just don't have as much confidence as I had even a month ago for Michael. I think it's right outside, but we'll see how those reshoots turned out. I've got it at a 76% right now. How about this one? You can even see the poster art that they've decided to use on Letterboxd for Anne Hathaway there, but it's called Mother Mary, directed by David Lowery. It says an epic pop melodrama following a fictional musician and her relationship with an iconic fashion designer. Dude, I am fucking on board for this movie. This screams Gerald, and David Lowery is another filmmaker, like I mentioned earlier with somebody like Kelly Reichardt, that deserves his flowers. He's done such great stuff, but it tends to be a little too genre for the Academy. So I'm curious what we're looking at here with Mother Mary, and depending on the tone and the susceptibility for the Academy's palette, maybe even performance accolades for Anne Hathaway, of course, but Hunter Schafer also has a supporting role in this movie, and I love her. Definitely Euphoria, but other things she's done recently, like Cuckoo last year. She's just a phenomenal actress. I even really, really liked her in the Hunger Games prequel that came out last year. She's just a phenomenal actress, so I would love to see her at least get some notoriety on the awards circle this year. So keep your eye out for Mother Mary. I have it right outside the 10 right now, around a 70% probability, but this is one that is really high on my watch list. Here's another one that I have currently locked in to the 10 for Best Picture with a pretty decent 85% probability to get nominated. And the reason also is because it's one of the very few films from an international perspective that I feel really good about, or that I've heard enough chatter about to give it the green here on this video. And that's No Other Choice by Park Chan-wook, of course, from Drive My Car, which did get a nomination a couple years ago. And I think his time is coming. I see him as a international filmmaker that's going to start to rise in the notoriety that he gets here in the States, but really around the world. And he is such a visionary filmmaker that really knows how to tell a story. and I have no reason to believe why No Other Choice will not be the exact same thing that we're used to from him. But I've got to have some international representation because, believe me, they're going to nominate international films, and I think they should. So what are they going to be this year? That's what I struggle with the most during my research here. But one of the easy layups for me was Park Chan-wook's No Other Choice. I think it's one of the nominees next year. And now we have come to the film that I actually have at my number one most likely to be nominated for Best Picture next year. And not only that, receive multiple nominations across the board. And that's for PTA, Paul Thomas Anderson's new film, which has finally been given a title, One Battle After Another. I have it at a 90% along with two other films that we've talked about, one of them already, and the third one is coming up. So those three films are my only quote-unquote locks right now. Of course, that could change if the reception of the film is negative or it doesn't pan out to be what I expect them to be. But with this film, PTA is returning. He's got Leonardo DiCaprio. The last 6 or 7 films that Leo has been in have all been nominated for Best Picture. He doesn't even really pick a project unless it's Best Picture worthy, frankly. Sean Penn, Regina Hall, Benicio del Toro, Alana Haim again from Licorice Pizza, of course. It does give off the vibes of a action kind of revenge story, which narratively worries me a little bit from how digestible that may be for the Academy. But I just don't think you can ignore Paul Thomas Anderson coming on the scene, starring one of the biggest movie stars when it comes to the Academy Awards of all time in Leonardo DiCaprio, not to mention some of the other performers in the film. I think you're also looking at probably screenplay, cinematography, editing. I mean, who knows with this guy? One of the best alive doing it. I think this one is a surefire nomination for Best Picture. Like I said, if it comes out and people hate it, then I'll revisit that stance. But that's where I am right now. I told you guys that I was kind of hunting for international picks. So this is one that I came across that I haven't seen, called Orphan. It's a German film. It says that in Budapest in 1957, 1 year after the failure of the Hungarian Revolution, a young Jewish boy whose mother has raised him to believe that his father will return from the camps had his hope shattered when a British stranger showed up on his doorstep. So kind of a vague story there, but obviously going to be set during a tumultuous time, wartime. It's going to be important when you look at a film like The Zone of Interest or even The Brutalist this past year. It's going to have that important narrative kind of built throughout it. And I think that that's going to speak to the Academy. They love movies that are important. And they should. I'm not saying they shouldn't. But there's always one or two of those that show up. And this being an international representation, I wanted to throw it on the list too as a possibility, just because I haven't heard anybody else talk about it. And I came across it when I was researching international movies coming out this year, and the plot line jumped out at me, like I said. But since I haven't heard anybody else, literally anybody else mention it, I have it in the red right now, but I'm keeping my eye on it as one of the international possibilities this year. Here's another Best Picture nominee in my book, at least as I'm sitting here right now in March, a year away. And that is a movie called Sentimental Value, directed by Joachim Trier. And this is a film starring Renée Rosva from The Worst Person in the World. So we're going to get her what she is due at some point. Just a phenomenal actress. She showed up in A Different Man this past year. You would know her if you saw her, if you don't know who I'm talking about. She's an amazing actress. I believe Norwegian, but she is a great actress. Stellan Skarsgård, possible supporting nomination for him coming for this movie. I do know there's a tie-in with Hollywood with this movie too. I think one of the sisters is an actress, or was an actress perhaps. I don't know if that's Renee's character, but I think that whenever Hollywood as a backdrop is in a movie, especially with these huge familial dramatic themes, that it speaks to the Academy. I love Trier. I love what he did with The Worst Person in the World, like I mentioned, also starring Renée Rosva. I'm ready for this one. I'm ready for this one to be a huge Oscars player. Now, I could be way off, and it could not even get mentioned in the second half of the year. But I just see it and see all the elements that it currently has, the ingredients, and I say to myself, that's going to get nominated for Best Picture. And that's what I'm kind of going on right now because I don't have much else to go on. So it's in the green and it's in the 10 for Best Picture if you ask me right now. This one is in the yellow, and it's slightly below his brother's film, Marty Supreme, that I mentioned earlier. And I'm talking about Benny Safdie's movie, The Smashing Machine. This is a movie based on an MMA fighter and his kind of coming to the end of his career and dealing with that. And it's played by The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. That gives me huge pause for the Academy. Now, I know it's been picked up by A24, but when you look at a wrestling movie like The Iron Claw, if that didn't get any traction from A24 or from the award circuit, I just don't see why Benny Safdie's first solo directorial debut starring frankly, somebody that's not Academy friendly, and The Rock, a huge action star, would be that movie. I think of Mickey Rourke and The Wrestler. Sure, that was a great one. We talked about Aronofsky having that pedigree with the Academy. Safdies just don't have it yet. Dwayne Johnson definitely doesn't have it yet. Emily Blunt is a good pull in a supporting role in the movie, but I'm just not seeing a lot else that makes me think the Academy is going to go for it if they didn't go for some of the other movies that I think were even a little more Academy friendly or had bigger names coming along with them. Now, I am extremely excited to see this, and I really want to see what The Rock does with a kind of dramatic, serious, worn down role where he's not the big buff action star. I'm interested to see his angle with that, and maybe he will blow me and a lot of the Academy members away. But right now, I need to see it before I can believe it, so I've got it in the yellow for The Smashing Machine. Another film that premiered at Sundance that I've heard amazing things about from friends of mine and people that were there is a movie called Sorry Baby, which is a movie starring the director. So we have a actor-director combo here in Eva Victor, somebody that I wasn't super familiar with, and also the poster that's been released so far has her holding a cat, so it's right away shooting to the top of my must-see list. So this definitely sounds like a character-driven, hopefully performance-driven piece. It's going to center around Eva Victor's character and how we are following her journey of depression or reestablishing her place in life. We'll see. Character pieces can be really, really fascinating, but they don't always speak out to the Academy unless it's a true story, which this one, to my knowledge, is not. But it did get rave reviews from Sundance, and I think it sounds Oscar-y. So I've got it in the yellow right now, but I'm really excited to see Sorry Baby, as I've heard a lot of people really did enjoy that film. And there's a cat in it. Another one that has been screened, I believe, at Sundance is a film called Train Dreams. This one's in my yellow, but this one I think I probably should have ranked higher when I'm kind of hearing it play out in my head. But it stars Felicity Jones, Carrie Condon, both of which have had huge success in recent years at the Academy Awards with The Brutalist and Banshees of Inisherin, and it stars Joel Edgerton in the lead role. This is also a wartime period piece who is forced to be away from his wife and child for many months at a time in order to provide for them, and it deals with his kind of discourse around his situation, and I'm sure there's a lot of drama that comes to fruition from other characters in the film, aside from his immediate family. It sounds very like existential outlook on life type of film. And that says Oscars to me. I think it probably should be more like in 74 instead of a 64. But I need to wait and see how it kind of plays out. I've seen a couple reviews from friends of mine and they really enjoyed it. So right now I've got it in the yellow around 64% for Train Dreams. But hang tight. That one could climb as we get further into award season. Getting down to the bottom few here. This is another international pick that I grabbed that premiered at the Cannes Film Festival last year, and it was up as a finalist in their LGBTQ prize that they give out at the Cannes Film Festival. I can't remember what that title is called. It didn't end up winning, but it's a film called Viet and Nam, which are the two young men's names that portray miners in this film that work in coal mines and basically end up developing a romantic relationship and sharing their friendship is becoming most dear to them. So it sounds a bit like a story about like forbidden love, especially in the environment that they're working in. And I'm sure that will lend to some beautiful moments, but probably some heavily dramatic and maybe even tragic moments as well. I think it's a long shot, and it's another international one that jumped out to me when I was doing that research, much like the other ones I've mentioned on this list, aside from Park Chan-wook, of course. I'm actually going to see this movie this week. It comes out in a few weeks for nationwide, but it's a film called Warfare, directed by Alex Garland, but it's a co-direction effort, as he also directed it with a guy named Ray Mendoza, who is an Iraqi war veteran, and it's based on his experiences. So this is a modern wartime film. Think of something like The Hurt Locker, which did get love from the Academy, and it's obviously going to be a very gritty, intense, real-life situation that's playing out in this movie. They didn't give Civil War any love, not even for something like Best Sound at the Academy Awards this year. Alex Garland's one of the best filmmakers we have working in the last decade. I would love to see him, and by extension his friend Ray Mendoza here, get some love for Warfare, but I haven't seen it yet. I haven't really even seen any reviews about it yet. I've seen the trailer and I've seen some stills. You know, Charles Melton is in there, who obviously has success with May December. Will Poulter, Joseph Quinn, Kit Connor. It's got a lot of young men that are up and coming in Hollywood. I just don't know that I'm confident that the Academy is going to recognize it the way that maybe it should be recognized, especially when you're thinking of how Civil War underperformed this past year. So because of that, it's in the red. It's a slight possibility depending on the reception of the film later this month when it comes out. So we'll see. All right, and here's my other third lock for Best Picture. We're doing it in alphabetical order, so if you're wondering where Wicked for Good is, here it is. So 90% tied with the Paul Thomas Anderson film and Avatar Fire and Ash. Those are the three movies that I think are definitely getting nominated next year. Look, this is a story that could go awry for John Chu. The second half of the musical is much darker, much more serious in tone, much less fun, for lack of a better way to put it to you, than the first half, which is, of course, what we saw this past year for the first installment of Wicked. So depending on how it is relayed to the audience and how these new original songs are incorporated, obviously the performances of Arrivo and Grande were two of my favorites last year. So are they able to continue that kind of charismatic charm of bringing the story to life? I think they will. That's why I have it at a 90%. I also think that the success of the first one this past year, and really it not getting the accolades, frankly, that it could have gotten, particularly like Ariana Grande, or really any of the performances, I'll just put it that way, and the direction of Shu. It did get some text that we knew it was going to get, like costume design, but it deserved a lot more, and what it did at the box office would speak to that also. I think we're in for another behemoth at the box office for part 2 here, and I think that the Academy is going to, if they love part 1 but they didn't award it, they might sit up and go, all right, here we go, here's part 2, and you know what? That was damn good too, so Ariana Grande. And last but not least, the 40th film I'm mentioning on this video, which is in the red, so I don't think it stands a huge chance as I'm sitting here right now, but it could. It's a movie called Wild Horse 9, which there's very little known about the film except for this. It's directed by Martin McDonagh, of course, of Banshees of Inisherin. It stars Sam Rockwell, Mark Ruffalo, John Malkovich, Parker Posey, and Tom Waits. And the only thing that's on Letterboxd right now, it says set on an island but not Ireland. Further details to be announced. And you know what? That was enough for me. I put it in there as a possibility. I could definitely see it happening. He just does it, man. McDonagh knows what he's doing. He knows how to make it quirky and funny, but still palatable enough for somebody like the Academy. So I think that this will be one that people will be talking about as we get further into the year. I'm not sure what the release date on it yet is either, which worries me that it might not even come out in the qualification zone. But if it does, I expect it to be a player. Right now, I've got it in the red because there's just too many question marks as we speak. All right, guys, that is it. That was my first, I guess you can call way too early Oscars predictions for 2026. All right, guys, look, it's me from the future. I forgot to tell you, I made this little chart. It's on the screen right now. This is all the scores I gave the 40 films that were mentioned on this video. The ones in green are the 10 that would be nominated for Best Picture as I'm sitting here right now today. One Battle After Another, Avatar, Fire and Ash, Wicked for Good, Hamnet, No Other Choice, Anne Lee, Sentimental Value, Caught Stealing, Highest to Lowest, and Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein just sneaking into the 10th spot. That would be my Best Picture nominees, and you can see the scores for the other films. There are obviously some more that will be in the mix, and maybe I'll do one more of these videos a little bit down the line when it starts to come a little bit more into focus. But I just wanted to share this chart with you because I made it, and I was bummed that I forgot to include it in this video. Let me know what you thought of this list of 40 films that I think are on the radar currently for next year's Academy Awards and really for awards season in general. What did I miss? What movies need to be on my radar that I need to add for my next video? Please tell me, because believe it or not, the research for these things from somebody that doesn't really go to the film festivals, and I just don't have an opportunity to see a lot of stuff. But because of all that, it can just be hard for me to really have a grasp on what might happen, especially this early on. So if you've heard of anything, or definitely if you've seen anything that you think should be in the conversation that I failed to mention, please let me know. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. I'm sorry it went long, but I wanted to talk a little bit about 40 films on one video. I'm already excited for next year's Oscars. I hope you guys are too. Hit me up in the comments, and I'll see you out here next time in the garage. Thank you.